Away from Pakistan to the leaders of the 29 member states of NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, who were greeted by Britain's Queen Elizabeth II at the Buckingham Palace. The Queen hosted a leaders' reception ahead of the two-day summit to mark NATO's 70th birthday. Queen Elizabeth, along with Prince Charles and several other members of the House of Windsor, were seen welcoming dignitaries and foreign leaders. Absentees from the reception included Prince William, who is on an official visit to Kuwait and Oman, and Prince Harry and his wife Meghan, who are on a 6-week break away from the pressures of royal engagements. The Queen was joined by 29 leaders of NATO countries for a group photograph, including US President Donald Trump, the United Kingdom's Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Germany's Chancellor, France's President Emmanuel Macron, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and others. And we have WION correspondent Natalie Powell joining us live from London for more on that story. Natalie, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us. Talk to us. This summit, the summit for the 70th anniversary of NATO, has seen a lot of drama, a lot of action, and now this event at the Royal Palace.
Yes, certainly has, and all of the pomp and ceremony really took place on Tuesday. We saw, in addition to those events at Buckingham Palace and at 10 Downing Street, where they met with the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson at his residence, aside from all of that, we also saw a number of bilateral meetings taking place on the sidelines of this summit. We saw the US President Donald Trump meeting with a number of the NATO allies, including the French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, the Turkish Prime Minister as well, and several other of the heads of state as part of NATO. But today is really where the real work has been happening at this summit. We understand that leaders have been involved in this summit for around about 2.5 hours. It's expected to run to about 3 hours long, and in it they will discuss many of the issues that we have been hearing about in the lead up to this summit here in London.
Right, and before we let you go quickly, Natalie, that banter, that conversation between Trump and Emmanuel Macron, clearly, grabbing the headlines and setting the tone, so to speak, for this summit.
Yeah, it certainly has been grabbing the headlines here, Emmanuel Macron and US President Donald Trump, but that was always really going to be the case. We saw in the lead up to this summit here in London, Emmanuel Macron talking about NATO, explaining that he believed that the alliance was brain dead, in his words. And when Donald Trump arrived in London yesterday, we heard him talk about how he believed that those were quite nasty comments made by the French President Emmanuel Macron. The two of them did have a bilateral meeting on the sidelines of this summit. A little bit of an awkward discussion had following that in a press conference. Clearly, the two men do not see eye to eye on a number of issues. But of course, one of the things that they are here to establish is the longevity of NATO. Emmanuel Macron clearly giving out those comments suggesting that NATO is brain dead, in his words, because he wants to see improvements there. We also know that Donald Trump wants to see improvements in as much as more spending, more defence spending from the NATO alliance countries as well. So both men are coming together on that front, but clearly tensions are rising between the US and France, not specifically related to NATO, it must say. A number of tax issues taking place between the US and France implicated in that as well.
Natalie Powell joining us, but Natalie, again, before we let you go, this whole thing was supposed to be about Turkey, this summit and the problems within the NATO, but now it's all become about Emmanuel Macron and President Trump. Turkey and what Turkey has to say still has a huge impact on the outcome of the summit.
Yes, absolutely. One of the big talking points of this summit is actually the fact that Turkey seems to be withholding its support from further defence strategies when it comes to the Baltic nations and Poland against Russia. It says that it is going to withhold that support because it wants the other NATO alliance countries to see the Kurdish forces in northern Syria as terrorists. But of course, we've seen those Kurdish forces fight against ISIS with the US troops out there. And there are big issues surrounding this that have been dominating this. As to dominating this has been the future of NATO with regards to, of course, one of its members perhaps not playing ball, it should be said. But of course, Turkey has hit back against these comments, saying that that is not what it is attempting to do, that it is not going to withhold its support in a kind of blackmail type environment that is taking place. We also know another big issue being discussed here is funding for NATO and, of course, the dominance of China, with China's defence spending having increased. NATO estimates that China is the second largest global country to spend on its defence systems. So lots of discussions taking place around the table here at the NATO summit, and we are expecting a communique with regards to many of these issues to come out in the coming hours.
Natalie Powell joining us with those live updates straight from outside the NATO summit venue in London. Thank you, Natalie, for being with us here on WION Dispatch.